And we're live. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. We are going to be discussing creator economy, and I'm going to be your moderator for this session. My name is Shafali. I am a journalist. I write about tech and culture for this publication called Mint. We have a very interesting panel of speakers here with us today. I'm going to ask each one of you to introduce yourselves. But before that, I will introduce Roshan Abbas, who doesn't really need an introduction, but since he's not here, we're going to be, probably waiting for Roshan to join us anytime now. And after that, why don't we start with Varun? You please introduce yourselves.
Oh, okay. So my name is Varun Dugrala. I'm the co-founder and content chief at an agency called The Glitch. We're one of, I would like to say, India's largest creative agencies. One of them. I've also host a couple of podcasts. I do a podcast called Advertising is Dead. I've been doing that for over close to 150 episodes now. I also host another podcast called The Varun Dugi Show. Write a weekly newsletter, post random dance reels, and look sunburnt for some reason on panels. That is literally what I do. So I'm going to lead it on to the next person.
Malini, again, another person who doesn't need an introduction, but we'll just make you do that.
I second Varun on random dance reels. I too have fallen prey to that and I really enjoy it. So I'm Malini Agarwal. I'm the creative director and founder of Miss Malini Entertainment and more recently Girl Tribe by Miss Malini, which is a all women's app to create a kinder internet for women because I think it's time. I've authored a book as well and done various different things. I've been a host for 6 seasons on television shows. I used to be an RJ for 9 years. So, a little bit of everything, just like Varun.
Lovely. No sunburns there.
Well, I have a lot of makeup on, so you can't tell.
Great. Manvi, over to you. Please introduce yourselves to the guys.
Hi everyone, I'm Manvi. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm leading the editorial at Vitamins 3. We're essentially a content brand that is seeking to reshape the narrative around gender and identity in India, usually by talking about things that either you're too afraid to ask anyone about or that you think are a little too taboo for young women to talk about. No dancing reels as far as I'm concerned, but I do also host a podcast when I don't have away from work.
Great, terrific. Lots of podcasters, lots of dancers, and and
One
viewers here,
sunburnt person.
and one sunburned person.
Yeah.
Great. So we'll just dive right in. The topic itself is what does the creator economy need to thrive? I'm going to sort of harp on an existing meme format here, which is that the existence of this question implies that there is an issue with the thriving. So we'll start with you, Varun. Tell us, what do you think? There's just one issue which you think the creator economy faces, which is a challenge for it to thrive in India.
Um, I don't think we have a dearth of creators, but I think we have. It's still early days in having systems that support creators to create. Right? I think that's really what it is. The platforms are doing stuff, creators are doing their thing, but most creators struggle with the same set of problems. Who do I work with if I want to make a video? Who do I work with as a crew if I want to make a podcast? So it's really that support, I would say, system which most economies have. You would have people who do the central work and everybody around it. I think that's really what we're kind of missing, and I feel as that kind of comes in, it also creates more opportunities for people to do to create jobs for themselves, careers for themselves around that. I think that's really, if I had to pick one, I would pick that one because I think it's early days, but it's huge opportunity right now.
Oh, absolutely. I remember a lot of the people who got into creator economy in the last year, right? I remember somebody who said that they live alone. They actually put their tripod next to their wardrobe, just so that there's no falling down and accidents that happen because,
Yeah.
they don't have that support system, somebody to help them
Yeah.
shoot the videos.
Yeah.
And then editing and then posting and publishing. I think
Yeah.
there's, it's endless the number of things that they
Yeah.
need to do.
Yeah.
Malini, coming to you, tell us, what do you think are the issues, that can stop the creator economy from thriving at this point?
So I'm going to take it from a creator perspective because I think I was a creator before we coined the term back in 2008. We didn't think of ourselves that way.
You're the OG.
The OG. And something I've really been thinking about more and more is that, when I was creating content or blogging, my sense of self or my validation didn't come from somebody else's likes. and it wasn't in somebody else's hands that way. And I think one of the things that people may not realize when you talk about a thriving creator economy is the mental state and the health that we are, giving these creators, and the kind of pressure we're putting on them. So many are young, they're like Gen Z, who are, trying to hustle hard, but we all know from the years that we have worked, burnout is a very big thing. And especially when you put so much pressure on someone, and I know Facebook started with the right intent, with the like button, to put some positivity out into the universe, but it's very quickly become social currency, and we don't really know what it means. And what I think is interesting is that it's not even so much your fear of how many likes you have, it's you worry about what other people will think about how many likes you have.
Yeah.
And it's become this very weird cycle for creators as well. And along with that, for creators, there's this feeling of, what should I focus on? What platform? Should I be everywhere? Am I missing something? Is there FOMO? Should I create long form, short form content? Which agency should I go with? Because everybody runs an influencer agency. Should I do something with my metrics? Should I buy followers? Oh my God, I bought followers. Now what do I do? So there's all this noise and so much, fragmentation. The sector is still very unorganized, unfortunately, but we can get there. And then the other thing I think we need to focus on is, as these new platforms come and go, there is this very real sense, I'm sure you've heard this term now, where the platform can turn on the tap for you, which is that, well, if you go to this platform will promise you that, hey, I will technically turn on the tap and you'll get all these followers. And I literally, case in point, was at Fashion Week, and they just adopted a new platform and they have so many followers because it's very easy for the platform to do that. So how do you make sure that there is integrity in all the platforms, and how do you make sure that we keep everyone's mental health in mind? Because at the end of the day, creators are creating happy, fun content. It has become industry. It is work for us now too. But I think at the larger scale of things, we really need to be careful about, are we actually helping them thrive? I think, Ariana Huffington has her whole Thrive concept now and created empire around that. And it is focused on mental health.
True.
Yeah.
Some really interesting points there, Malini. And I was just thinking, when you mentioned turn on the tap, how, in the startup and tech world, where there's, constant poaching of developers, engineers, product guys. We saw that last year with creators, right? There was like massive creator poaching that was happening, especially the top TikTokers amongst the other sort of TikTok alternatives that came up. Interesting points about the validation. I think in the second segment, I'm going to come back to you. I have some questions on that. Very curious to know how we can solve that. But before that, Manvi, you tell us, what are the issues that are stopping creator economy from thriving at this point?
I think for me, the one big issue would be that I think content creators are still platform dependent, which means that invariably there comes a stage where there is an unequal footing when we look at content creators, right? For instance, I mean, the big story when TikTok got banned was that there were a lot of creators from tier 1 and tier 2 cities who had made such a name for themselves on TikTok, but they weren't able to find that kind of a space on, say, something like an Instagram, to the point where even if they had a good amount of followers, they were not kind of getting the kind of brand deals that they wanted. So I think for me, focused growth for creators from tier 1 and tier 2 cities will sort of really open up the creator economy, even for brands who might be looking for creators who are doing niche content, but they are just a better fit. So I think that is one of those things that probably needs to happen, just so that like Varun said, it's still early days, but just so that it really opens up.
Yeah. In the second segment now, we're going to talk about how does one sort of go around navigating some of these challenges. Varun, you mentioned support, I think, which is a very valid point. How is that being solved? What are some of the successful case studies that you think are also feasible for a majority of creators?
I feel what's really starting to happen, I think it's been a slow process, right, is that there's a community getting built. I think there's smaller subsets of communities that are getting built. So if I'm a young YouTuber today, but I turn around and say, okay, maybe I can help someone who's an established creator, saying I can edit videos for you. So it's helping me make money and also lets me create what I'm creating. I think that's really starting to happen a lot more. You're also seeing people turn around and see opportunity in that. I mean, I would say in the last 2 years, especially, I've come across so many people who literally would, like, I now have a small team that works with me on my content. I've got a 4 to 5 member team. None of them are full-time events across the board. And most of them are people who DM me for random things, right? I mean, one of the guys who edits my videos is the guy who sent me timestamps on a YouTube video saying, okay, you aren't timestamping it. I have timestamped it for you. And I can also do this for you. So now he's editing videos for me, right? Somebody else kind of was a long-time listener, kept giving me perspective on what I should do on my content. So now he's kind of working with me on overall strat. So what's been good is that suddenly as community kind of comes together, the more you help each other, the more this platform gets built, and that's really what's happening. I've literally spent so much time talking to podcasters just because I want more people doing this, and I find that really fun. I have 1 hour blocked out every week where I record with someone who's doing their first one between 0 and 10 episodes. I'm like, I'll be your first episode, I'll be your 5th episode, because it's interesting to see what people are coming up with, and that's been a lot of fun to see. And I think we hit that point when everybody just sat at home and said, okay, I can't go out and do something. Let me just create content from home. But I feel that's kind of coming. I think that will really help. But what I feel we all need to kind of work towards a lot more is monetization. I feel what has always been the case is you need to be that, couple million subscribers, couple million followers person to make some sort of money on social. But I think that's kind of switching around to saying, okay, can I just have 1,000 people but give them great value and make money out of it? What are the options there? I think that's really where it's really coming down to, and that's a good thing. It's a balancing factor. So can we create more opportunities for the guys with 1,000 followers to make money? And also, how can you kind of help each other from like a community perspective? I think those are 2 real like pillars of kind of making this an actual economy.
Yeah, and I think it all boils down to that, right? Like, how do you sustain means money. Also, Varun, I would really love to listen to a podcast where you talk about this entire journey of everybody who's a part of that podcast team now, how you met them, and how this all worked out. I think that will be a fun listen.
For sure.
Malini, in the first segment, you said, you spoke about validation. You spoke about how likes has become the whole "kuch to log kahenge" ya "log kya kahenge." Bas itne hi likes. How does one solve for that when brands are still looking at those kind of numbers as a metric? I'm really excited to hear what your thoughts are on that.
I think what I'm excited about is that I remember starting off in 2008, knocking on brand doors saying, listen, this is a great way to reach an audience. And they all said, I don't understand. You guys just play games online. I don't really get it, and we spent years, and full credit to my business partner, Mike Melly, who really changed the face of influencer marketing. He got a lot of brands to agree. And now so many brands, this is their main way to engage their audiences. But I think, again, the mistake people are making, this wow factor, and I'll give you an example of it. So when you put up a billboard, right, you have great brand awareness. You see Deepika Padukone holding a phone, right? You're reaching a large audience. The next stage, you see a TV commercial, something that's not very interactive. Okay, you're getting visibility there. Then you have an influencer who's gone and posted about it, but you've also seen the influencer post about 5 other brands that day, right? So you may or may not be sure that they're the right person to approach for my buying choices, for instance. The real way I feel that people are actually going to move the needle on selling a product is micro communities. I think things are changing. We are going towards smaller communities, just like Varun is saying. Even for me, when you were talking about it, people have volunteered to make my first banner, do all of those things, and it's great that that exists. And I think that's why I always tell people who feel like, well, I'm a new creator, I can't do anything because there are people with 10 million followers and they're singing and dancing. No objection, I do it too. So how can I ever break in? How can I ever make a difference? How can I ever mean anything? But there is a theory about 1,000 fans. If you have 1,000 dedicated fans, you can run a business. You can start a business. It's about 1,000 fans that will be willing to buy what you have to sell. Now, very often you might have Mercedes-Benz promoting their car. Now, they might go and do it with an influencer with 10 million followers. How many of those 10 million are going to buy the car, right? You might rather want to go to a niche creator who has the audience, who's actually talking to people in the luxury market. So I think brands have to become a little more savvy, and that's where agents of change come in. So it took me a long time, and I thought about it a lot before I launched my own influencer agency. So Ignite Edge just launched a couple of months ago, because I really wanted to come to it from the perspective of being a creator and knowing what it's like to put your livelihood and your life in someone's hands, and also be someone from the other side that understands how to translate things to the brand, because the brand wants to see metrics. They want to see results. Now, it used to be the equivalent footfalls in my store? How many people will come to my store if you say it? Now, this is the virtual footprint, right? So I think it's really about evolving. And I think brands are slowly becoming aware of the fact that you have to let the creator be the creator and then seed in content. Great examples of this. If you look at Kusha Kapala's content, her brand integrations are so beautifully done that I will remember the brand, but it does not feel like a misfit in the marketing. And the brands that she promotes also fit with her. She also is very careful about talking about brands that she genuinely believes in. So I think the future for this will really be developing, launching brand IPs, celebrity brands. If you see, Anam just launched her own makeup line, things like that are happening. Creating individual content for influencers. So some of the influencers we represent now, we're creating TV IPs for them. So it's all about evolving that. I think the biggest mistake people make is sticking to one format and saying, okay, now everybody's doing this, I should also come and do this. And I learned this because when I started out doing what I do, nobody was doing this, right? Everyone was like, Malini, what do you do? You know, even my mom didn't understand what I do for a living. She thought I was an internet blocker, that I get, regular people get a lot of spam. Celebrities must get even more. Malini blocks their spam. This is her understanding of what I did. She's 81, so bless her. But so I think it's about saying that, hey, it's okay. So anyone who's watching, who is a young creator, who's like, oh, I only have 5,000, 1,000 followers. How will I ever make it? Don't worry. Find your niche. Be consistent about it. Know who your audience is. Build your 1,000 loyal fans, and you've got a business.
I have to say, Malini, for the viewers here, you did not give your entire introduction. I think it was incomplete. You should have started by saying, I started my career as an internet blocker, then went on to become a creator. And now I think this is interesting, what you mentioned about the natural progression there. You've been there, you've done that. So you can probably now, get onto the business side and probably guide the others to do it better. We saw that in advertising, which, as Varun says, is dead. In advertising, you'd see that, right? A lot of people would shift from advertising to the client side and would bring in that perspective, would be able to sort of translate a lot of those concerns when they moved over to the client side. So it's interesting that the creator economy is already seeing that with people like you.
And I'll tell you something, Shefali, the best thing I've done for myself. Of course, business is business, and you can pull out your metrics anytime. I have turned off seeing people's like counts, and I have turned off displaying mine, because I think it just makes such a big difference in my mental impact, where I'm not going to see the number of people. I'm going to actually have a valuable interaction. And now what I've decided to do, and I think everyone should do this, whether you're a creator or not, imagine the virtual world as the equivalent of the real world. So if someone has a conversation with you, and I'm sure, Varun, when you have your conversations and podcasts, this will happen. When someone leaves you a long comment, you won't, in real life, if someone came and poured their heart out, you wouldn't just do this or this and bounce, right? You would stick around and engage. So that's the thing. Don't ghost people who have come to you. What we do is, in this greed of how many more comments do I get, we ignore all the people who came. And that's how you don't create loyal fans.
That's such an important insight, Malini. I think occupation hazards, but I thought that was a great quote. Some interesting insights that we've gathered so far. So communities and the opportunities that that are coming up. Varun was approached by people on their own. Some of them are now working and helping him build his podcast and grow them. Malini spoke about micro communities and the counter, or sort of the reverse obsession with likes, which she's trying to sort of strive at. And again, the opportunities with engaging deeply with people as opposed to this. Manvi, you said something, which is basically very close to my heart. You talked about the haves and the have-nots of the creator economy, the niche creators, the regional creators, local creators who don't get paid as much as, the quote-unquote mainstream ones. How does one solve for this?
I think it's one of those things that we are also at Vitamins 3 thinking about, because, see, one of the things that one of our mission statements, if I can say so, is to speak to the young woman and to speak to her in a language that she understands. So not in a way that we are preaching to her, but in a way that fits the concerns that she has, which invariably sort of, when you're looking at young women and questions she has, comes to ideas around sexual health and menstrual health. Now, we started off with some assumptions about who are the kind of women and where do they live in terms of who is going to be consuming our content, because at the end of the day, Vitamin 3 is also a content creator, right? But then while we were doing our community sessions, which is why I completely agree with what Malini said to an extent about why building a community is so important. Because when we started doing our community sessions, we do something called Talk to the Streets, we have our newsletters, we're doing book clubs. When we started speaking to them, we realized that actually a significant chunk of our audience is not in tier 1 cities. They're actually in tier 2 and tier 3 cities. And there's a huge curiosity and a huge demand for that information that we are putting out, where we had some other assumptions about it. So I think that sort of, I guess, alerted us to the fact that while we look at the creator economy, there is a certain amount of inequality where we are only thinking about creators that are in cities like Delhi and Bangalore, and where monetization for those creators is a lot easier, whether it's in terms of finding an agency to manage them, or whether it's in terms of just the basic knowledge of knowing how, like, for instance, YouTube or Instagram metrics work, right? So I think that's one of the questions that we are also thinking about in terms of, as a content publisher, in terms of how to reach that audience, but also as a content creator who collaborates with other creators as well. So I think, I think one solution for that is something like TikTok has done in the US, where you have a content marketplace. So you have a content creator marketplace where you apply based on maybe your followers that you have, the kind of content that you create, and then this is essentially a marketplace that's not public, that's private, where brands can come and, like, collaborate with creators. So obviously it gives the creators a little bit of cred when you're talking to brands, and brands also have a little bit more options beyond the usual 5 suspects. So that could be one. But personally, for us as Vitamins 3, I think we have realized now that community building is really the way to go. Where, like, exactly like Malini said, where it makes sense to have those 1,000 true fans that we know will eventually turn up for every community session we do, for every book club session that we do, because we know that that is then the community that we can strengthen by speaking to them, by having a conversation with them. And we're very lucky that Vitamins 3 has a very vocal community. Like, we've been called out sometimes when we've missed stuff. People feel like a sense of ownership with our videos, where they're commenting on YouTube saying that we're commenting just to increase reach, because we think you guys are doing such a great job, but we don't know why you're not more popular. So I think that sense of ownership that people have is something that eventually leads to building a community. So I think those are the solutions for it: community building, as well as maybe from the platform side of things, maybe a content creator marketplace that allows creators of all kinds to meet with brands of all kinds.
Mm-hmm. At this point, since we mentioned the 1,000 true fans several times, I think shout out to Legion, in the US, who's been doing terrific stuff on sort of popularizing and getting creator economy the kind of respect that it deserves from the investor space, as well as outside. That said, you mentioned the creator marketplace. That actually is a sort of a good link to the third segment, which is about the creator economy startups, especially the tech-based startups that offer a lot of solutions to streamline the creator economy and to grow their opportunities. There are quite a few that we've seen in India as well in the last 2 years, and they've got ample funding as well in the recent past. Tell me again, starting with you, Varun. Tell me which are the ones. If you don't want to take any names, that's fine. But tell me about the business models that you're excited about, and the ones that you're still sus about.
So I have a bit of a thought on creator marketplaces, right? And I feel that there are different kinds. There's some kinds which are focused on creators who can do workshops and who can do courses, etc. Right? But I don't think every creator can do that. And I tell many creators that you don't have to be doing that. That's not the only way you're going to make money. I think Gumroad globally is a great example to look at. I know many people trying to emulate what they're doing, because they figured a way to make it work for any creator. I did a conversation sometime recently with Nasser Yassin as a Nas Daily, and he was talking about how he's saying what you need to build is an operating system for a creator to be able to house anything they can do with their community. You don't have to tell them, oh, this is the only thing you can do, or that's the only thing you can do. And I think that's actually the way to look at it, saying what is the operating system that every kind of creator needs. And what do people pay for? I think more importantly, I think what you need to think about is what value would you give them what extra can you kind of put it out there? I've actually thrown some stuff out at the audience over the last couple of years, asking them, okay, what would you pay for? Would you pay for a WhatsApp newsletter? Would you pay for bonus content? Would you pay for specific conversations? But I feel what people will eventually pay for is just like an extra value add, right? If they get something beyond what everybody else is getting, are they getting exclusivity? I think we don't look at exclusivity enough. We want everybody to pay for stuff. But if you think, I'm only going to give people 100 people this, right? I feel over time that has more value than you giving it to everybody out there. Even though in the short term you won't make as much. I think that those are a few ways to look at it. I know NFTs are kind of filling in for that part with the exclusivity part. I don't understand crypto. I have understood NFTs in a very weird way because someone explained it to me like a kindergarten student. So I think that's really where the answer lies. But if you ask me, and I think there's an offshoot to this, right? We look at direct monetization in many ways, but you make a lot of things indirectly. I'll give you an example. I started writing a newsletter last year. I have about 2,000 subscribers now. I've been writing it week on week. I'm in a 1-month sabbatical right now on it. And I started writing it because I wanted validation because I'm writing my first book. Right? It's out early next year. And I was like, okay, I want to, and standard creator problem, right? I want validation to understand if I can actually do this. Will somebody read my book? But what's actually happened because of that is I now have a set of people who I know like reading my stuff. I've also built an entirely new audience. And I know for a fact, a large number of them have said they would love to buy the book. So I'm like, okay, maybe 2,000 people at least, hopefully close, maybe half of that will maybe buy that book. And I think that's another thing there is that you're creating stuff and something connected to it could make you money. I mean, one thing is the book. For somebody else, it could be, another piece of content. Someone could become an actor by virtue of the creatives they put out there. So we often think of just what the content will make, but what you can kind of make off of that is actually, I think, the more interesting way to look at it.
Mm-hmm. I didn't want to sort of let you go off the hook and talk about the ones that you're skeptical about, but I know Malini has a hard stop and I really want to get her in on both these questions. So Malini, tell us which are the business models in the creator economy, tech startup space that you're excited about.
You're on mute, Malini.
You're on mute, Malini.
Happens once a day to all of us.
Has to.
No, so what I was going to say is that exactly what Manvi said. I think it's important to be platform agnostic. So I'm a big fan of having multiple platforms. But having said that, I think we have to make sure that the platforms that we adopt and we promote are unique in their own ways. So I'll give you an example. I think also because, I feel like radio was my first love and blogging my marriage. I'm a great fan of the theater of the mind and the audio medium. And I'm sure all podcasters agree. So I think that what Clubhouse and Twitter Spaces have done is very interesting. And I think it's especially interesting from the perspective, and I'm sure especially all the girls who will agree, is that it's so nice to be able to take a breath and say, okay, I can see all these people in this room listening to me, but I know they cannot hurl abuses, eggplant emojis, or ask to see my boobs when I'm talking about breast cancer awareness. It is a great sigh of relief. And that is something that I think larger platforms like Instagram and Facebook need to address. They need to figure out a solution. And I think this became even more clear to us during the pandemic when we were all sitting at home doing Instagram lives every day. And the comments that would go up, I would just be sitting there and saying, why am I subjecting myself to reading these, And so I think it's really important that as platforms show up, they have some thought about this, I mean, like Facebook is developing this multiverse. Surely we need some online governance, and I think this is one of the things that I feel very strongly about. And I actually put a link into an app we've started called the Girl Tribe, which is where I want to really switch this thought about positivity and giving, so a lot of us get our great joy on social media from dopamine, because every time you get a like or a share or a follow, it gives you a hit of dopamine. It genuinely does. It's scientific. But the thing that we don't realize is the other way to get a hit of dopamine is giving. It's literally called something, the helper's high, it's called. And it is great to have something that's in your control. And you will notice this at any given time. If you do something nice for someone else, you will never feel bad. You will always feel as elated, if not more, because you think of yourself as a wonderful person, or whatever happens, you feel great, So I really think that's something that we should hone in on. And I feel that platforms like I've really appreciated what Clubhouse has done. I think there's more like that in the works as well. But I think when it comes to an interesting thing that's happening now is that a lot of people think of all these new platforms that are arriving, whether it's your Josh, your Takataks, everyone. Everyone thinks of them only as the same, like everybody is TikTok. But I think you also have to deep dive and see the difference, right? You have certain platforms, you have your Reposos, you have so many others that are doing shoppable content, and actually it works even better for brands. So, people have to do their homework and not just assume everything is just all one and the same, I am skeptical of just any and all platforms that come hire 100 creators to say, okay, now we are the next big thing. I think that there has to be some kind of filter. There has to be some kind of barrier to entry now, and that has to be something that's defined by all of us. It's been around. This industry has been around long enough now. And if you look at some of the biggest players in other industries, you only have like 2-3 giants in that industry for a reason, right? Because they reach a certain level of quality and success and trust. So I think that's very important. But I keep going back to the human end of this. I know we're talking about business and we're talking about the creator economy, but I really must stress again and again how important it is to save your mind space in this.
No, but you're, I think we're all with you here, Malini, because we're all humans, who are running the businesses. So I guess we have to sort of look at the human first. I'm actually going to sort of ask you the last question as well, so that after that, if you want, you can go. You mentioned moderation for a lot of these platforms. Now, one thing that I see bothers a lot of creators, and it's something that I pick up a lot as well, is respect for creators, like them being taken seriously by the industry, by stakeholders, and by people in general, who are not a part of the influencer economy. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that obviously there's no content moderation. So a lot of times creators also end up, saying things that, might be tone deaf or insensitive. I think in the last 1 year, we saw a lot of such examples. There are FIRs that are being filed against the top YouTubers for them being, sort of perpetrating misogynistic content. We all know who we are talking about. But how does one solve for this, and who needs to solve for this?
I love this question because I feel that this comes up so often. And, so often all of us are guilty of saying, oh, toxic internet, and oh my God, people on the internet are like this. And we need to step back and think about this, because it's not some alien nation that we are suddenly now being subjected to. We are social media, all of us. We make up this entire universe. So who is going to fix it? We have to fix it. Each of us has to fix it. And for the longest time, when I used to get a creepy message, I used to tell myself, ignore it, because we were all told that women have always been told, just ignore it. Let's not make a big deal out of it. And then very recently, I started this campaign called Ignore No More Online, because there's a friend of mine who's an actress who started to call out people who were doing these things. And I was so impressed by something she did. Okay, so she would go, because now people are shameless enough to use their real accounts. So she would go to their account, do a little detective work, find their parents or their school, and email the authorities of their school or the parents, who would then call sobbing, saying, oh my God, I'm sorry. And they would go from calling you a slut to sorry, Didi, so fast. Yeah. And I don't think they would ever repeat that. So I really think it's interesting, because, you can keep telling women that, ignore it, but I can't unsee, I'm sorry, the dick pics in my DMs. I can't unsee that. So, and why should I have to see it at all to begin with? And just like you said, yes, absolutely. I'm so glad you brought it up. And why not name them? You have your Shubhan Mishra, who was propagating, abusive messages, threatening rape, even your Hindustani Bhau, who I'm so glad their accounts got deleted. But you have to do more than that. And this is something that I want people to become very aware of. And I'm very happy to say I've recently joined the Women's India Chamber of Commerce and Industry. And my very first agenda is this, cyber governance for sexual harassment. And all of us can take part in this. It's very simple. And I want to tell everyone this, and this is not just for the women. Varun, please tell all your listeners on your podcast too. If you ever witness, even as a guy, you witness someone being creepy, to any extent, whether they are, messaging someone over and over again, they're sending inappropriate messages, it can be any amount, anything that causes you discomfort, you can simply file an FIR, and it is against the law to outrage a woman's modesty, even online. The problem is we don't take it far enough. Just reporting it to the platform, I'm sorry, platforms, you don't really do enough.
Yeah, I think also, I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt you here, Malini. I think also the problem is when it's somebody who's a creator who already has millions of subscribers, and then they're peddling sort of problematic ideologies and regressive thoughts. How do you sort of fight that? Because you'll have an army of.
Just like we fought any injustice, the people have to speak up. The only way women have gotten independence, or black people have gotten out of slavery, is because people spoke up. You can't put it on an institution only. Yes, absolutely, the institutions have to do something eventually, but none of us do enough. I mean, let's be honest. Even I know so many men who propagate positive masculinity, but how many times do they actually stand up in the comments and say, hey, this is not okay? Instead, not come and say something very again macho, like I'll come kick your ass. No, do something. Take that effort. That your friend who's getting these dick pics, you say, listen, you don't have to look at this. I will do it. I'll look at it. I'll find this guy. I will do the FIR. We have to do the work, is what I feel.
I'm actually going to hold you on to that thought of do the work, and I hope all of us do that. Manvi, going to take sort of a recap and go back to the previous question. So tell us which are the startup models in the creator economy that you're excited about, and which are the ones that you're kind of skeptical about.
So there are some very exciting things that are happening in the startup space, especially in the creator economy. But the ones that I think that personally I, and also as a part of an organization like Vitamin 3, are looking more closely at are tech startups that are creator focused. Because the thing is that, of course, Vitamin 3 is an organization where we are a content creator, but we also work with other content creators. And it's usually, I mean, the thing that nobody tells you about creating content is that it's a one-person startup, right? You've got to do everything on your own. So you're doing monetization, you're doing distribution, you're looking at how you're scaling up. Like Malini said, you're also looking at the quality of content, you're looking at community building. So creator-focused startup models, and there are some very interesting ones that are coming up that sort of take care of, maybe, like, if I can say, the end-to-end of that. And I think tech startups that are focusing on creators that are looking at niche things and that are doing micro creators in this, if I can say so, because they're doing niche content. They're not really putting out something that would be palatable to all brands, say, coming on board. So how can you sort of bring them into the economy as well, where they're also then looking at making monetization, even if they have, like, say, for instance, 20,000 followers and not 100,000 followers? Is there a monetization strategy that can come from there as well? And I think that is something that, as Vitamin 3, also we are looking at, because for us, like I said, the focus is community building. So, of course, if we know that, I mean, of course, we'd love to get to 100K, but I'm saying if we know that maybe getting to 100K is not the goal, maybe if our goal is community building, what are the ways then in which we can get to a stage where the Vitamin 3 community is not only paying for the content that we're putting out, but it is, I mean, we can also look at then scaling it up in a way that makes sense. So I think those are the ones I'm bullish about. In terms of being skeptical, I think I sort of agree with Malini, where I think a lot of, after TikTok left, where you saw a spate of platforms come up, but I think there was a little bit of, and like the platforms were signing up creators with exclusivity. I'm not sure that that's something that works, simply because the competition is so high. I'm not sure that an exclusivity model for a content creator where they're only on one platform is beneficial either for the creator or for the platform, because, like Malini said, there are different platforms have different things that work for them. Like, for instance, if I'm big on Instagram, maybe I'm bringing something else completely different to you on Twitter Spaces. Yeah. Right? So I'm not sure. I mean, I'm a little skeptical of the exclusivity part that a lot of new platforms are now bringing up.
But I think those are still platforms. I think what I meant was, startups like actually, Pepper Content, for instance,
right.
That's all for, the creator issues, be it monetization and organization, or, just a support system. So anything there, because I get a sense that, a lot of such startups have come up, but there is a lot of skepticism on, whether this is something that we really need this, and to what extent do we need this? Any thoughts on that? And I'm
really sorry. I'm just going to bounce out. I'm really sorry to interrupt, but thank you so much for having me. And it was wonderful listening to you, Manvi and Varun and Shefali. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for all the quotable quotes, Malini.
Thank you. And I know some people wanted some advice. You can just email me, malini@missmalini.com. I do check my own email, and I will definitely reply to you. Just mention that you heard at this conference. Bye. See you.
Bye. All right. Malini, the OG internet blocker for you guys.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, Manvi. So, anything on those lines, the tech startups offering value to creator economy or promising to sort of offer value to creator
Yeah.
economy that,
I
your
mean, I feel I am a little skeptical of exactly what you're saying of startups that are focused on creators but are only looking at metrics and numbers, because I'm not sure that that's the way forward. I mean, if there's anything that we've heard since the beginning of the session, it is about how important a community is for a creator. So then, if, for instance, I am doing really well on Instagram and I have 20,000 followers, and I approach, say, a creator agency, if they're rejecting me on the basis of the fact that I only have 20,000 followers, then there's very clearly a disconnect, because it could very well be possible that the 20,000 creators are such a huge and an important community for me. And I also think that there's a little bit of, I would love to see, for instance, a lot more of content creators who are working in non-English and non-Hindi languages. And I think as far as a lot of startups are concerned, there is still a little bit of that bias that sort of creeps in. I mean, there's a great article that I was reading last week that was published on Boom Live, I believe, which was about Sunita Sarkar, who was really
from
popular.
Calcutta.
Who was from Calcutta, really popular on Instagram, really popular on TikTok, who got her fame by rapping to Nicki Minaj videos.
Yeah.
And so while she was on TikTok, of course, she was getting getting partnerships and getting some sort of brand deals while she was on TikTok, and she's from rural West Bengal. But once TikTok got banned, she still made her audience on Instagram using some of the older content and newer content, and she's at 50K followers. But the brand deals that she's being offered are only for 500 rupees, which of course is a little ridiculous. So the idea there, of course, is that there's a little bit of that bias that sort of creeps in when it comes to class and caste, even when you're looking at influencers. So I think it would be great if you have tech-focused startups that are talking to creators like that, also to sort of bring them into the fold, just making it a little bit more of an equal marketplace. I think that would be great for someone like us at Vitamins 3 also, who's always looking for newer ways to reach younger women in tier 2 and tier 3 cities as well.
Yeah.
I just have a point to add on this. I think what's also a good way to look at this, because I've seen a bunch of the questions in here as well, right? And is that you need to figure out, are you an entertainment-based creator or are you a value-based creator, right? If you're entertaining only, then your options become a little lesser, because then you have to hit scale at some level. But if you have some value you can actually give, maybe what following you have, let's say across all social platforms, won't even matter. You can go straight to like having a podcast, having a newsletter which could go paid, to even doing some of those pieces which people are willing to pay for. The more I'm convinced that this mind block we have that people don't pay for stuff is not true. It might be smaller numbers. You might say I'm charging 50 rupees, 100 rupees, but if you get 1,000 people in, that's still a sizable amount of money over time.
Yeah.
And I think we need to figure that block out and then plan accordingly. Because people will, like podcasts, if you're niche, it's great because you get a lot more sponsorships and a lot more ads if you are niche compared to if you are more massy in that sense. So there are platforms which push you, actually help you better if you are niche. So I think maybe we can focus on that as well.
True.
And also adding on to what Varun said, it's also about proving your value again and again. So if you have 1,000 people who are willing to pay for you, and if consistently over, say, the next 6 months, you have been proving your value again and again, you will see a rise with 5,000 people. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that you're competing with like big name content creators, but it still means that you have that community to sort of rely on. Because I think the difference between a value-based creator and an entertainment-based creator is a good sort of framework to think through this.
Yeah.
And guests have gone rogue on you at this point of time.
The other thing, Manvi and Varun, because I had sort of started writing about TikTok, just before it got banned. And this is something that I noticed while TikTok democratized fame for a lot of people, including the creator from West Bengal and the one from Jharkhand, the siblings on whom Rest of the World had done a fantastic piece on erasure of, a particular class of creators. TikTok, while it democratized fame for these people, even that was not able to solve for monetization for this class. So if you'll see, the top 10 TikTokers were, irrespective of the backgrounds that they came from, they were from big cities. They were Bombay, and I think there was just one that was from Delhi who had also eventually moved to Bombay. I mean, I think that's for a different session altogether, but I guess what you're saying, is 100% true, which is that we need some creator economy startups right now that can solve for this issue. So that I think that issue kind of remains. Varun, the business models that you are skeptical about.
This is the business model for every creator. My T-shirt is basically every creator's headspace. I mean, there could not be a more how would I put it? I totally lost my train of thought.
We can't zoom into your T-shirt right now, so you'll have to explain.
My
the
T-shirt
Venn diagram.
says it basically says absolute narcissism and crippling self-doubt, and in between is what you get is art, right? And that's literally what every creator goes through. This is a T-shirt I like to wear. That is literally what we all go through, right? But going back to your question, which I totally slipped in my head. So to get right, you want to talk about what we need in terms of business model?
No, the business models that any creator economy startup business models that that may or may not have had funding in recent times, that you felt like, okay, what is the utility for this? Did we actually need this?
Yeah. So there are a few which, I was initially very skeptical on cohort-based learning startups, because I think people kind of cop into that and create their own things. But I'm convinced more and more that if you go cohort-based, then you can actually kind of learn a lot better. So I find that way of education better, because it brings the socialness out there. You are not then being a teacher as much as you are kind of building a community there. So I think that's one piece which I was initially skeptical on, but actually Vaibhav Sisanti is the person who kind of got into my head and ate my head to make me understand why cohort works. So Vaibhav drilled it into my head to explain why that's valuable. And I think when he does that, obviously, it kind of gets into your headspace. And that's one. I've also always been skeptical of social commerce. I think there's a lot that can happen there. This whole content plus commerce piece, which is kind of scaling up. I was just reading the news of the lipstick king in China, who sold 12 billion worth of products in a 12-hour live stream. I don't know, 12 billion, or it was some billion in a 12-hour live stream. And I'm like, that's actually what it can do, right? In many ways, that people can kind of figure a way to build storefronts on their content. And there's a great Indian example for that as well. There's a company called the Indian Ethnic Co. And I had the founder on my podcast. And it's a great story for a mother and a daughter who built an ethnic clothing company. Everybody works in the company are of different sizes. So they're the ones who model the clothes. They do dance reels on Instagram. They've built a following, and the business is built off of the people who follow them and buy their clothes off Instagram. Great story. She says her mother was a co-founder at 60, which I think is one of the best lines I've gotten from a guest in years. But you can kind of build a business over it. So you don't necessarily have to do mass. You can say, okay, if I do this, I can build a business of it. A great international example, which is one of my favorite in recent years, is a creator in the States, in California, who does interior design content. So she leases a place, does interior design of it, that's her content, and then leases it out as an Airbnb. She right now runs 6 Airbnbs in the California area.
What's
her
the name of
content is what makes I look it up. I will
by the
time Manvi is done, I will look it up and put it up, because I saw her on the Colin and Samir show, and that's where I remember her from. But I think there are ways. So we need to think about, okay, this is media I'm building for myself. Even if 1,000 people, 2,000 people, 5,000 people, or 100 people who follow me, what can I do as a business that's something they would kind of latch on to? I think that's the way to look at it. That's long term, because you can't be consistently creating content for the rest of your life. It's not possible. It's going to we all have seen the repercussions of that. So what can you build on top of it is more the question, or what message do you want to amplify? That's really the question.
Yeah. Before we I get into the last questions with the both of you, we have to wrap up. I'm already getting messages that we have to do that ASAP. Tell the viewers and the audience where they can reach out to you for these questions, because unfortunately we won't have the time for this right now. So Manvi, where can they reach out to you?
Yeah, they can reach out to me on LinkedIn. My name is Manvi. There's no surname to it, so you just need to look for Manvi and Vitamins 3 and you will find me. You can also find me on Twitter and Instagram. My handle is @Manvi, MAANVI2501.
Varun.
I'm @Varun Duggi on all social platforms except for LinkedIn, where I'm Varun Duggirala. Or just email me at hellos@varunduggi.com. I say hellos and not hello. It's a weird problem I have. So it's hellos@varunduggi.com. And the creator is Shelby Church. I think she's finally off TikTok and YouTube, but Shelby Church is the creator who I found that that's a true business, right? You just build it off content. So
somebody's already mentioned that in the comments, by the way. People here are ahead of us.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah, there's so much.
Panchsheel has beaten me to it.
Yeah, Panchsheel. This is a Gen Z sign. My God, I'm old. Manvi, with you, let's just get into the last segment now, the content part of it and the quality of the content. How important it is for creators to be responsible about the language of the content and its expression, and who takes the responsibility for it.
I mean, my entire job as the editorial lead of at Vitamins 3 is to ensure that every piece of content that we're putting out is aligning to Vitamins 3's values. And the thing is, we have found in our experience of working with brands that when we make it very clear, even in the first meeting, that we're very happy to work with this brand, but we will maintain editorial independence. That is just one of the things that we are taking. So because the thing is, we know our audience, we know for a fact that our audience has a certain level of trust on us, and we don't want to violate sort of that trust. So for us, for me personally, at Vitamins 3, quality of content is supreme, because we want to ensure that whatever community that we do have, and it might be a small community, we don't want to sort of violate that trust. And then it goes both ways also, because there have been instances in the past, say for instance, when we have been called out by Vitamins 3 community members for instance, not talking too much on trans issues. So we've taken sort of that feedback, decided to start to work with members from the community, and then, have gotten back to it saying that we're sorry for the language used and we've corrected it. So I think being open, one is, of course, I think that's a decision that every content creator takes for themselves at Vitamins 3, because we know that we're a content brand at the end of the day. So for us, the quality matters. The second thing is also, the way to do that is, I think, just to be open and acknowledge the learning. Like sometimes I feel that a lot of people get unnecessarily defensive about it, but there is no need to be. I mean, for one great example that I always use is that I've started, whenever I introduce myself, I've started using pronouns, saying that, hi, my name is Manvi and my pronouns are she and her. Now, this is something that I've started doing over the last 1 year, because we had interns in our organization who would introduce themselves, and they felt the need to use pronouns. And I was like, wait, this is something that we need to do. So then we started doing it in every Vitamins 3 video that we put out as well. Whereas an anchor, you would just say, hi, my name is so-and-so and my pronouns are so-and-so. So there's got to be that kind of, you have to be open to that kind of a learning.
Yeah.
As far as what Malini was saying in answer to this question earlier before she left, I'm not sure that a content regulation from a third party is something that could work. I think what could also work is brands saying that, hey, we know that you have X many numbers, but we don't want to work with you because we don't agree with the content that you put out. And that is something that we have seen works for us, because we have seen brands come to us saying that we like the content that you do, and we like the fact that you have something to say, and that you're not diluting what you have something to say just because you're working with a brand. So we'd be very interested to work with you. So I think if you have, or if you're very clear about who you are and what you're saying, and being open to learning, I think brands will see that as well. So, I mean, at least I hope that brands will see that as well. So I think one of the things is that it can come from the brands too, this kind of, maybe this kind of thing that maybe we don't want to work with you because, hey, what you're saying does not really align with what
I think, but the problem there is, again, because of the way this industry is so fragmented and not organized right now, brands rely on their agencies, that rely on the influencer marketing agencies and their talent, and nobody really watches the content of these people.
I mean, they're only looking at metrics at the end of the day. Like if an agency, like I understand that part of the problem also. Like if I'm a brand and I say, hey, I have this product that I want to sell and I want to get into influencer marketing, and an agency is giving me 10 options, then what I'm being presented are metrics. So I think
responsibility needs to be to be shared there. I'm now coming to you, Varun, for closing thoughts on this. Do you think this really is one of the major reasons why the creator economy is not as respected? Because a large chunk of the creator verse, which is not in the mainstream and not in our scrutiny, does sort of talk about a lot of stuff which is probably very regressive.
I think there is a way to look at it, is that nobody would be popular if people weren't consuming their content. So I feel it's a larger problem than just being a creator economy problem in that sense of the word. But I do feel that, especially if the monetization is through brands, and if the monetization is through someone paying for the content, that's where you can actually tap into the fact that, okay, would someone pay for it if it's regressive? I don't know how many people would pay for it. I think there's a lot of free regressive content out there. I don't know how much will be paid regressive content. And secondly, the only other way you can make money off it is if you actually create content that brands will put money onto. And I know for a fact most brands do stay away from anything that feels troublesome. And there's a plus and a minus to that as well, is that sometimes if it requires you to take a stand, just in present environment, many times people do kind of stay away from taking a stand in terms of the content they will kind of go after. So I feel that's really the way to look at it. And how do you make sure the funnels themselves of monetization make sure that it's more progressive than regressive, or rather, more than anything else, it's more positive than negative. I think that's really the way to look at it. I wouldn't pay for anything negative, but I would pay for something positive. I think that's a standard human emotion. I worry. I'm sure there are some people who might pay for something negative, but I'm not. I think I'm hoping that's a minority for all our sake. But I think that's the way to look at it. Is say that how do you make sure that if you control the funnels of monetization, you can actually control the positivity. There's this whole conversation about how Twitter should have a subscription model and not an advertising model. Primarily because, again, if you make the way you make money not on mass but more on value, then it just flips the whole thing around.
Yeah.
I think so. That's the thought that we are going to sort of, leave with in this session, where I for sure have learned a lot, and I hope the audience did as well. If you control the funnel of monetization, you can control the funnel of positive content. Great thought. Thank you so much, Manvi. Thanks, Varun. For sort of making the time for this and giving all these insights.
Thanks, Shefali, for doing this, and thanks for having me.
Thanks everyone who joined in.
Yes,
and,
thank you, everyone.
DM me questions you want Roshan to answer. I'll get him to respond to you and send it to you.
Yes, please.
Right.
Thank you.
Right. All right.
Okay, bye.